very interesting, your work looking at artificially sort of lab-grown meat. Can I just ask, just as a starting point, how long does it take to grow a piece of meat that's the size of a burger?
Right. It takes about 9 weeks to grow a piece of meat the size of a burger, and that's sort of inherent to the replication speed of cells, and you don't want to mess with that really. So we are stuck to that 9 weeks. By the way, it's equal for one hamburger or for 10,000. So the time is not really that important, I think, because it's a matter of capacity to grow simultaneously a lot of cells.
How did you get interested in that whole area? I mean, what led you to growing a lab-grown burger?
Right. Well, so the way I got interested in this whole thing is kind of accidental or coincidental, if you like. We had or in the Netherlands, a program was ongoing on cultured beef, and my university was involved, but not myself. But then the program manager fell ill, and I had to step in. And I immediately became really enthusiastic about that application. I was already tissue engineering for medical purposes, in particular blood vessels. And so the technology was pretty familiar, and I thought the application was just terrific, and therefore I did pursue it.
There's been a lot of concern about the environmental impacts of growing meat. I mean, obviously livestock and farming livestock. And they produce methane. They eat lots and lots of feed. There's lots of waste products and sort of byproducts. Is there the same consumption of energy when you grow a lab-grown piece of meat compared to livestock?
Well, this is technology in development, so we haven't reached an end stage yet, and therefore I cannot really very specifically say what the expenditure in energy is going to be. There is a very early life cycle analysis based on a combination of algae growth for the feedstock, for the feed of the cells, and the mammalian cell growth, and they arrive, depending a little bit from region to region, at a reduction in required energy, and therefore I assume resources for about 50 to 60%. Obviously, it's more for land and it's more for water. There, it's a 90% reduction, but for energy, it's about 50, 60%, which would be a major step ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at the actual point, I mean, at the moment, it's obviously being produced in a laboratory. How long do you think it would take to get to the point where it's being produced on an industrial scale?
Right. So the timing towards industrialization and getting into the consumer's hands, if you like, is again something that I cannot be very specific about. But I know that we need to scale up production, which obviously we're not going to do within academia, but we're going to set up a company for that. We're in the process of doing that, so that's something that will happen in the next couple of months. Scaling up production will take some time. We have now developed sort of the technology to be able to scale, but we haven't scaled yet. And then, of course, there is the regulatory issues. This is going to be a novel food, so we have to go through the regulatory pathway, which can easily take up about 3 years. So, for consumers to get their hands on this product, which initially will be pretty exclusive and expensive, there's no other way I can bring that. Will be somewhere between 5 and 7 years. I am confident that in the years after that, the price will come down actually pretty rapidly to reasonable prices, probably still a little bit higher than beef, unless beef, of course, increases in price, which it should.
Yeah. I mean, there are some parts of the world where, obviously, we're looking at potentially what the world will be eating in 20, 30 years' time. And the consumption of meat has grown significantly, very rapidly, with an increase in people's earnings, in those parts of the world and their GDP. Whereas other parts of the world, like the West and certainly Europe, the consumption of meat appears to be slowing, if not declining, in some areas. do you think that there's going to be more demand for the sort of meat that you're growing in those markets where people are concerned about the impact on environment, they're concerned about maybe the quality of meat in terms of the way it's produced and the impact, the way in which livestock are cared for, the whole organic argument, if you want to call it that?
Right. So the reason why we are doing this is because of the projected increase in demand, especially from India and China, and at some point also Africa, because as you said, that demand is linearly related to the gross domestic product of a country. It is possible that the reduction in meat demand in, for instance, Europe, will actually be affected when we create an alternative that makes more sense for the environment, is less incriminating on animal welfare, however you want to call it, has less ethical issues, and uses less resources. That's a possibility that will increase the demand elsewhere. So that the total demand, that this actually will increase the total demand of the society. That is a possibility. On the other hand, it will then at some point reach a critical point where we also have limited resources to grow this, because eventually this product is also going to use more resources than just being vegetarian. If we all become vegetarian, we are fine, both medically, by the way, and also sort of environmentally. So, I assume that will then be a price balance issue, and I also do actually assume that projected increase in meat consumption is going to decline again, as it has in Western Europe, because at some point we just don't want to eat meat every day. If we are satisfied enough and we have sort of satisfied our craving for meat, there is a limit to that. And we see that culturally determined, and we see that also changing over time in different cultures.
Can I ask a very potentially a superficial question? What does it taste like?
Sorry about that. The obviously, only 10 people have tasted this, including myself.
Yeah.
And you ask me, and I am biased, of course. But the tasters, let's go back to the tasters, the independent tasters at the event in London. They said quite specifically, well, it has the texture of meat. You taste that it is meat. It's not quite there yet. It's still blend. Honey Kutzler found it to not salty enough, which is easy to change. But they both found it dry and not juicy enough because it didn't have any fat. So that product obviously was not a perfect product. We are now working on the fat and hope to resolve that. Myself, I thought they were a little bit more polite about this product than I would be. Yes, it is identifiable as meat. It's definitely, that's sort of my reference, if you like. It's better than any vegetarian hamburger that I've ever tasted. And also in terms of how it handles itself digestively, I think I had a better experience than with most vegetarian hamburgers, or with all vegetarian hamburgers. But yeah, I did agree it was dry and it was not quite there yet. The more we try to mimic this product, the more sort of admiration I get for the real product.
But in terms of the actual taste, would it be more like beef or lamb or pork or chicken? I mean, what does it most closely resemble?
It resembles most closely beef, I guess, and lean beef in terms of if you take, for instance, minced meat from lean beef, you also get a dryness to it that and a specific taste. This was more like that than a more fatty sort of pork minced meat.
So, presumably, when you're engineering a piece of meat in that sort of way, you can specify how much fat content, you can specify the different components of that that piece of meat, and that then potentially allows you to create almost tailor-made a piece of meat that meets specific dietary requirements.
Exactly, yeah. So that would be one of the advantages of this type of technology. You could create, well, there are a couple of advantages. One is that you can create somewhat boring but important, a constant quality of meat. So that you don't have to worry about, there is a piece that I cannot chew on or whatever. So I think for consumers that is kind of boring but also interesting in terms of what you can expect. We actually want to a certain sort of consistency in or constancy in our meat quality. At least I do. That's also boring. So can you create variety as well? The different sort of cuts of meat, and of course we're not talking about cuts here, but minced meat. Cuts is a different issue, which we're also going to work on, but that's more sort of advanced. And in terms of tailoring it so that you can sort of dial in, if you like, the amount of fat, and also potentially the composition of fat, which I find very interesting. If we can coerce these fat cells, because we are creating fat tissue right now, if we can coerce these fat cells into making more omega-3 fatty acids so that it becomes a product that lowers your cholesterol instead of increasing it, those would be tremendous additional benefits of this type of technology.
Fantastic. And just a final question from me. I mean, you were talking about creating variety in terms of the actual content and even the taste of the meat. Do you think we're going to get to a point where your lab-grown meat could rival, an Aberdeen Angus steak, for example?
Well, we are setting the bar high, but I think it can. Yeah, it can produce a very. So that's the one thing that I'm a little bit hesitant about, because we have actually, that's on the drawing table. We haven't actually done any experiments or any development in that regard. Is to create a full thickness steak. An Angus hamburger, yes, we would be able to mimic or copy that. An Angus steak, potentially, but then we need to work through a couple of technologies which are not really simple, but they have been described and they are in theory doable to create a full thickness steak. And that's definitely more challenging, but it's also necessary to work on that.
Now, I know you said that only 10 people in the world have tasted the lab-grown burger, but when you meet people, when you tell them what you do for a living,
right,
what's their reaction? What is the reaction of ordinary people to think, oh, that's interesting, I'd like to try that, or oh, that's quite sort of, that frightens me a bit?
Right. Well, both. It varies widely, and obviously, I'm. Each and every one of us talks only to a very specific subset of society. And I happen to talk to a lot of people because I give a lot of presentations. What's interesting is that there seems to be, if I use the media attention as a proxy for what the public actually thinks and wants, then there is a geographical difference. I'll see more interest from the UK, more interest from Germany and from the Netherlands. It's now coming from France, but I see very little interest from Korea, that sort of countries also. African or Southern European countries, it's much less. So there's a geographical difference, a cultural difference, if you like, and there is also a very distinct age difference. If I ask kids up to 12, they find this very, very intriguing and very interesting, and they have no problem with accepting this. If I talk to people under the age of 30, They have no problem accepting this. They're very interested in how it works, and they see this coming as an inevitable type of development. Above that age, it becomes highly variable.
Very interesting.
Right.
Well, look, I mean, that's absolutely fascinating subject matter. So thank you very much for talking to me today, and and good luck. And I hope one day I will also have a taste of the burger that you've grown. So
right, you surely will at some point.